A brand in China have sent me one of their most luxurious watches. This thing is absolutely unbelievable. But to understand what it is and why it doesn't look anything like a watch you've probably ever seen, we need to understand how a watch actually works, because this is not your average watch.
Inside a mechanical watch, there is a long, thin piece of metal called a mainspring, which can either be manually wound, which is straightforward, you just turn the crown around and that winds up the spring, or you can get an automatic watch which contains an oscillator weight that rotates around with the movement of the wrist and gravity. This energy then transfers through a set of wheels and winds the mainspring, creating an automatic movement. The properties of the mainspring are as such that it wants to unwind. As it unwinds, it's transferring its energy through the little gears to the balance wheel. This is on an axis, allowing it to swing, or the technical term oscillate, back and forth. There's then a tiny little fork called the pallet fork, which as the balance wheel swings, the fork moves back and forth, subsequently turning a wheel called the escape wheel. This system, called the escapement, is how the movement releases its built-up power in a controlled manner, allowing regulated timekeeping. Now this watch does all of that. But what sets the Black Hole apart from your average mechanical watch? Well, that. That right there is called a tourbillon. A tourbillon is a mechanism that constantly rotates all of the stuff I've just mentioned. This is done, quite simply, to counter the effect of Earth's gravity. I don't mean it's done simply, it's immensely complicated, but I mean gravity is the sole reason the tourbillon was created. Believe it or not, the tourbillon goes back as far as the late 1700s, invented by Abraham Louis Breguet. It is a French word that means whirlwind, which perfectly describes how it looks. So there you go. You now understand how a watch releases energy to create time, and how, because of all of the swinging parts, gravity could easily affect the release of that energy in such a way that ultimately the watch is telling a less accurate time. So that is what our friends at Peacock have done. But they've gone an extra step. Notice how all of these tourbillons are offset to the side somewhere to do its thing out of the way of the rest of the movement, while Peacock, they've put their tourbillon in the center. That is far, far more impressive. They've had to effectively impose it over the entire movement rather than have it offset in its own space. The hands have to then be set around the tourbillon, which mechanically creates a much more difficult task. It's almost like putting your heart on the outside of a ribcage. And they have done all of this for a retail price of $4,000.
They're actually also giving you 20% off if you want to buy this using my code. I'll leave all of that in the description. That means that this is $3,000 or £2,500, which is very reasonable given what this actually is and how complicated it is. The fact that it's also an in-house movement. Peacock have been going since around the late 50s, and about 20 years ago they decided to step up and try and join the watch market and make some really cool pieces, and that is what I have been sent today. This video has not been sponsored. I'm not going to be sending this to Peacock for review. I imagine this did not cost them very much to actually give me, so they're just getting the sponsorship for whatever this costs, which to them is probably a couple of Mars bars, but I am very impressed with this thing, and also it's a really unique opportunity to be able to get sent something as expensive as this at a retail price, whatever it costs them. So hopefully you now understand how impressive a tourbillon is. Tourbillon, however you want to say it. And that is what one of these things are. This box, by the way, very cool box. You can see the tourbillon movement here. And then there's this inside box, which is just incredibly well made as I break it to try and remove it. Incredibly well made. This beautiful sort of gloss, plasticky, whatever material that is. Absolutely lovely. A felt base, and then there's this brushed metal with this engraved, whatever that is, or maybe it's UV printed on the top, of a dial, not of this watch, so maybe that one's a significant watch, I don't know, but they might just have made a lot of these boxes and then they just decided to put all of their watches in this, I don't know. But it is a very nice thing. There is the watch in all of its glory. Let's take that out and look at that in a second. It also has their brand name in there, Peacock. Not a massive fan of the brand name. I'm gonna get that out there right now. Not a massive fan of the brand name. In the UK, there's a shop called Peacock, which sells very inexpensive clothes. So, not a big fan of the brand name. But that is, you know, not that important, I suppose, in the grand scheme of things. If we take out this little thing inside, you have all of the paperwork stuff, which is nice. Also smells too good to be healthy. I don't know what that smell is. It's like plastic or something. Yeah, there's a user manual, important notice on how to wind the watch, and the international warranty, which is unsigned. That's not very reassuring. But yeah, maybe that's because it's a review unit. Yeah, let's have a look at the watch. So this watch is called the Black Hole Tourbillon. And I don't know if you've noticed when we looked in some of the close-up footage, it does very much look like a kind of an epicenter. I don't know what all of the terminology is, probably should have looked it up, of a black hole. You know, everything is sort of going into the center. Everything is drawing you into the center of the watch. And actually, if you look at the back of the movement, which we'll look at closely again in a second, it has that sort of similar pattern. Everything is spiraling in. It's also actually clear all the way through, which is quite cool, but this very much is playing into black holes. The center tourbillon being the sort of the eye of the storm, sucking everything into the center and also drawing your eyes into the center of the watch. Around that is a really beautiful ring that is actually made of carbon fiber, which has mixed in loom into that ring there. So not the one that sort of domes round, that one with the bit of green that goes around the inside. Although this is actually in lots of different colors, you can check out on the website. Check out the website anyway, I'll leave a link in the description. It helps me look as if I've actually done something to be given this thing for free. But yeah, there's lots of different colors. I think that either the black one or the kind of khaki green one is really nice. The other colors look a little bit babyish, a little bit toyish in my opinion, but obviously colors and whatnot are completely subjective. I have to say, before we go any further, it's really important for me to acknowledge that this is not at all my taste of watches. I'm very much into sort of vintage watches mainly. I have been building some watches that are like dream watches from AliExpress, but my actual collection of genuine watches are pretty much all vintage, and you couldn't get any further from that with this. I believe what they're sort of going for here is a Jacob & Co. type watch, which is basically more of like just proving things that can be done for the sake of proving that they can be done and then selling them to celebrities. They are not by any means aesthetic in the way of like a traditional watch is aesthetic and simple. These are aesthetic in a far more sort of artwork, artistic way. Not everyone's cup of tea, but yeah, it's definitely a cool talking piece. It does look a little bit like it's a Ben 10 Omnitrix or something like that. It's huge, 46 millimeters wide. That is absolutely ginormous. It looks like double the size of my old little 34mm Tudor here. It is absolutely massive, although it's because of what's going on inside. There are 4 mainsprings in here. What I was talking about before, those mainsprings that you wind up and then it stores that power, and there's actually no power in it at the moment. So if I just start winding up, it's going to start moving around in the center there. There are 4 mainsprings. That gives this 120 hours of power reserve. That is absolutely mad. And also, going on inside this movement is 55 joules. 55 joules. You're probably wondering what a joule is. If I show you, this was a watch that I was building until I decided that it's incredibly ugly. This open back here, that I used for the shots earlier to describe how a watch actually works. The joules are those sort of little pink things. These are synthetic, but back in the day they would have actually been rubies, and that is because when you have like a metal sort of axle, if you want to call it to be really simple, for it to be frictionless, it's sitting on top of rubies. So it's in between rubies, and then bits of oil is placed in there, and then that metal is just effectively freely spinning without any sort of resistance, giving it the most accurate timekeeping and also longevity. So there are 55 joules inside here to try and help it tell a really accurate time. So you're probably going to be winding this for quite a long time to wind up all of the power in those mainsprings. The movement is a caliber SL5711P, that's what they've called it. It could also just be called mangoes. What that does translate to, though, in a more useful measurement, is beats per hour. How many times does it beat per hour? And the beating is going to be referring to that unloading of the mainspring's power. So that's how much it's actually going to be doing that in a regulated way. In this case, it's 21,600, which is sort of on the lower end of the averages. A Rolex, a modern Rolex, like a Submariner, for example, is going to be closer to 30,000, but it's very much within the average. It's just on the lower end of the average. Before we talk a bit more about the dial and its design inspiration, let's talk about the actual build of the rest of the watch. It's using a 904 steel. I don't know what that's going to mean to people. To me, that just means that I know it's made out of steel and not out of bread. But 904L steel. It is 12 millimeters thick, which is pretty thick. This is actually quite an old Tudor, but as you can see, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's like ridiculously thick compared to average watches, which I suppose is quite cool given how much is going on inside here. Quite a cool clasp, and the strap is really nice. It does not get any sort of lint or fingerprints. It seems to be resistant to all elements, including the grease on my fingers. So that's quite cool. There's also an anti-fingerprint coating on the sapphire crystal, which it is sapphire crystal, which is epic because it sort of folds all the way around the dial, the case. I don't know how to explain that, but as you can see, the top half of the watch is like 50% that sapphire crystal, and it has a really nice sort of curvature on it that wraps around it. Anti-reflecting on the inside, anti-fingerprint on the outside. Looks rather cool. Profile shot, pretty low on the wrist. It just goes underneath my sleeve very well. It wouldn't interfere as I rub the snot off of my nose. Fairly impressive given the fact that it has 4 mainsprings and 55 joules and a center tourbillon. So well done, Peacock. That's quite cool. But it does look massive. I do have very large wrists. This is probably the average person's ankle, but it doesn't look too massive. It just does when you compare it to like my Tudor, for example. It looks absolutely gigantic. But so are Black Hole, so that's very on brand. The lug width, although that's fairly useless information because this is a proprietary strap, is 25 millimeters, which does mean, again, comparing it to my Tudor, which is not an average watch, let's be honest, this is quite small, is huge. So it's a very, very thick. Everything is big. All of the proportions of it is big. So I'm not used to that personally for multiple reasons, but especially because I wear small watches. So yeah, this thing is going to be hefty for a lot of people. But for Dwayne Johnson, probably going to be quite small. Speaking of Dwayne Johnson, I'm sure he can go in the sea. This thing has 50 meters of water resistance. Quite why anybody is going 50 meters wearing a watch like this, I'm not sure. but it's reassuring enough to know that if you're washing your hands or in the rain, it's not going to break, or perhaps even in the shower. Although, again, quite why you're wearing a watch in the shower, I've never understood that. Do you not ever sort of need to wash your wrists, especially after wearing this hunky thing on your wrist all day long? The strap's quite cool, very easily adjustable, and also it just clicks down and then it becomes this very nice compact little sort of thing here. It's very, very cool. Completely, obviously, in-house made. It says Peacock on it. Very, very nice. And then if you want to adjust it, you're just going to sort of push it out and then adjust it onto the various different holes that are there. But if we open it all the way up, we can take a look at the back of the watch, which is not anti-fingerprint because this gets quite smudged, but it could be. I just maybe have extremely oily wrists. All the more reason for me to wash them in the shower. So the back of the movement is very cool, and you can start to see all of the little rubies there. There's quite a few of them, and there's one directly in the center, which is probably going to be the central sort of pivot for that tourbillon. But yeah, it's cool to see it all the way through. You can see my finger waving around in there, and I also really like that spiral into the center of the case back of the movement there. Very, very nice. You can see on the back there as well, it says Peacock since 1957. I cannot possibly go on any further without acknowledging the fact that this, as a timekeeping piece, is nowhere near as legible as a regular watch. I mean, perhaps the minute hand is fairly good, but that is the hour hand, which for 2 hours of the day is completely invisible. So when it's completely invisible, just take a punt as to whether or not it's 6 o'clock or 12 o'clock, because it's impossible to actually see it underneath this sort of frame piece here. I do actually quite like the design of where the minute hand is though. When I pointed it out to my friend, he said it looked a bit like a helmet, like an old war helmet. But actually that is referring to part of a black hole, like the arc of sort of light around the black hole. So it does take lots of inspiration from that. And as a design, I just think it's incredibly interesting, and it's certainly very unique. And I suppose that's probably what they're going for here mostly, is just creating something really different. And they've certainly pulled off that. I suppose, final thoughts really. Would I have ever bought this? Absolutely not. Not personally, not for £2,500. Certainly not for the original price, $3,750. That is pretty crazy to me, because you could genuinely buy a Rolex for that, like a vintage one or something like that. Would I agree to being sent it for a video? Yes. There's loads of reasons why there is. Firstly, it's a cool thing to own. Secondly, what an awesome video to make. What an awesome opportunity to make a video on something as unique as this. So thank you very much to people watching my watch videos. That's a really cool sort of achievement for me. Yeah, I wouldn't personally buy it, but it doesn't mean that I don't extremely value it and appreciate it. But it doesn't mean that I don't appreciate it. I'm grateful that the Peacock logo on the actual dial is really small and just at the bottom. I still think that Peacock is a rather horrible name. It's like a luxury car brand being called Pigeon. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not totally keen on Peacock, but it's the name from the 1950s. So that's rather interesting. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section down below. I would absolutely love to see what your thoughts are. I'm genuinely extremely excited to see what people are going to say. I'll be replying to as many comments as I can. Thanks very much, Peacock. Thank you. Goodbye.